Kicking off our free agency preview series for Pacers players. There's a couple to do, and we're going to start with Oshae Brissett, why the Pacers could keep him, why they could decide not to, what his future holds with the team, and what I ultimately think will happen for Oshae Brissett in free agency, all in today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News, and today we are getting going on Pacer player free agency previews. Done some high-level stuff on this offseason, but never anything really nitty-gritty for every player. So once a week for the next couple weeks, we'll do one Pacers free agent to be and break down the argument for bringing said player back for the Pacers, the argument against bringing said player back for the Pacers, and what I ultimately think will happen to insert some opinion into each of these scenarios. So those five guys, again, Oshae Brissett, who we'll do today and is only technically a free agent. I'll explain that in a second. Jalen Smith, Ricky Rubio, TJ Warren, and Lance Stevenson are the five. Plus, I'll probably do a bonus show on the, deserve a segment but aren't necessarily a free agent or a guy who with interest show. Dwayne Washington in that, Kiefer Sykes in that, Terry Taylor, Justin Anderson, and the two 2A guys, Nate Hinton and Gabe York, also all in that. But today, we're going to start with Oshae Brissett. So again, the structure will be why the Pacers would want to bring him back, why they wouldn't, and what I think will happen. And Oshae Brissett, why would the Pacers want to bring him back? Well, it's easy. He is young and talented, right? 23 years old, turns 24 in June, so just before free agency. Younger than Chris Duarte, right around the age of Tyrese Halliburton, right around the age, just a little older than Isaiah Jackson, right around the age of Goga Bitadze, just 3 years younger than Miles Turner, right around the guys that the Pacers would, in theory, like to have long-term on their team. And if they're going to be a younger team next year or any sort of rebuilding, Brissett fits that timeline because he's young. And if they want to be good next year, he fits that timeline because he has been a very talented player for them the last two seasons, was a starter for them at the end of the Nate Bjorkgren season in 2020-21 and was crucial for them. That's why they brought him back and signed him to a 3-year deal at the time. And then last season, played the most games for them by a mile at 67, started 25 times, was key for them down the stretch, fit very well with Tyrese Halliburton. So Oshae Brissett's a little different than some of the other guys we'll do these free agency previews for. In fact, he's the most different because between Rubio and Warren and Lance and Jalen Smith, their contracts all expire. Boom, done. They're all free agents no matter what happens unless an extension is agreed upon before the season ends. But why would that happen when they could just sign a deal as free agents anyway? So those guys are free agents. Oshae Brissett is a little different. Oshae Brissett could, in theory, become a free agent, but if he does, it's even less likely to me that he would leave the Pacers. So I'll explain the situation again, and I have on a couple podcasts before. But Oshae Brissett has a team option on his contract for next season at the minimum. If the Pacers pick it up, they have Oshae Brissett on the team next year at a $1.846 million figure. Nice and cheap for a player that, like I just said, is right on their timeline and is talented. That makes all the sense in the world. But if that is picked up, Oshae Brissett will then go through his fourth season next year, and then his contract will end. And at that point, he'll have had 4 years of service in the NBA and have just wrapped up a 3-year deal with his second team, because he was on Toronto's rookie year, which means he will become an unrestricted free agent. And that means he can sign with whatever team he wants with whatever contract he wants. And that might be fine. The Pacers might want to opt to have Brissett on the minimum next season. That makes sense. But the other alternative is they decline his team option next season, his $1.8 million team option. And then he would become, if they gave him a qualifying offer on June 29th, a restricted free agent this offseason. And a restricted free agent, for those who don't know these rules that well, if that player, if Oshae Brissett then signs a contract with a different team, the Pacers would have the right to match that contract and say, yeah, we'll offer you the exact same thing. And then Oshae Brissett comes back to the Pacers on that deal. So sometimes restricted free agency can be finicky. Like if there's a guy who's really coveted, who's a restricted free agent, teams might sign him to a crazy offer sheet with like a trade bonus and a player option, something that makes it unappealing for the team to match, but they do it anyway. Brissett's not at that level where there's going to be all those bells and whistles. So there's not a lot of risk in this for the Pacers. So the reason I explain all that is either the Pacers have Brissett on a super cheapo minimum deal next year for a rotation level forward who has been very valuable for them the last two seasons, which is great, or he's a restricted free agent and then they have him back next year anyway, either on the qualifying offer or whatever deal he signs with the Pacers or another team. And then they have him for more seasons anyway. So he's guaranteed, if the Pacers want Oshae Brissett on the team next year, they are basically guaranteed, outside of a team offering him an absurd deal in restricted free agency, they're basically guaranteed to have him back. So calling him a free agent is only a technicality on the off chance that the Pacers say, we do not want you back next year. There's no room for you. And I'll explain in the next segment the in theory argument for that sort of stuff, but I don't think that's a very strong or robust argument. So the reasons in favor of keeping Brissett is, beyond that he's good at his age, is that his next contract will probably be a pretty favorable deal for the Pacers, even if it's the minimum or not. And his qualifying offer next year is also super cheap. It's a 1-year deal, near the minimum, right? So even if he signs that to forego restricted free agency, they still have him on a cheap 1-year deal. So that is the situation for Brissett. So calling him a free agent is only accurate if they decline his team option, but even then, he's almost certainly going to be a restricted free agent that they could bring back. So the argument in favor of keeping Brissett beyond his talents is that his contract is going to be likely very solid, almost certainly very solid on the timeline of the Pacers already. So it's not hard to make this case, right? Last year, 67 games Brissett played. That doesn't even sound like that much. He missed 15, although if you'll recall, what a strange thing at the beginning of the season when in the first couple games, Brissett was just not in the Pacers rotation for completely inexplicable reasons. We were asking Carlisle in media, like, hey, have you decided to put him in? Like in their first 16 games, he only played 8, right? That's 8 of his 15 missed games right there. He didn't play in 11 of their first 23 games. And he only missed 15, right? So he only missed 4 games the rest of the way with injuries. So a really healthy season, just wasn't in the rotation early on. And then Carlisle was like, oh, you should play every game. So he surpassed Torrey Craig in the rotation, right? If you'll remember that. Like he proved his impact to a coach who, sometimes prefers veterans and likes certain skill sets to the extent that he got on the floor all season. Ended up getting his 3-point percentage up to 35. And a big part of why I think Brissett should be kept around, even beyond contractual reasons. I've already talked about the age and stuff like that, but he has talked about how he thinks he fits very well with Tyrese Halliburton. And that was something that was very obvious down the stretch of the season, right? He shined when playing with Hallie, who could dime him up at all times, right? The great cutter, and that made things really easy for him. And because Halliburton's so good in transition and finding those cutters, they were a wonderful pairing offensively that really boosted Brissett's value. And on the defensive end, Brissett's been a very good team defender for this Pacers team for a long time. So that to have them together is very valuable. They're around the same age. Like there is just no reason that Oshae Brissett should not be a member of the Indiana Pacers next year. And it's hard to even, the next segment, I'll talk about some stuff. And some of the stuff will apply to every Pacers free agent that I'll talk about next segment on the anti-argument. But the for argument is so strong, especially because he has a contract already, in theory, lined up for next season, that it's going to be very hard for me to come up with any reason to say, the Pacers should not have Oshae Brissett on the team next year. And the fit with Halliburton is going to be key for a lot of these free agents, and Brissett's is so strong that it just seems like an absolute slam dunk. So Oshae Brissett, very strong case to be back. To put the numbers in perspective, with both of those guys on, the Pacers' offensive rating with both of those guys on was 118 with both Halliburton and Brissett in the game. You take out Halliburton, it drops to an 11. You take out Brissett, it drops also a significant amount, right? So those two guys fit very well together. Halliburton's the core of the team. It seems like getting guys that fit with him should be key, and the Pacers can get Brissett probably on a cheapo deal, likely on a pretty cheap deal for the next few years. And as they kind of restructure their team and either build through a cap space route or build through a kind of complicated over the cap methods, having young players on cheap contracts is valuable. That's basically like having a draft pick. So to me, all the reasons in the world are there for the Pacers to keep Oshae Brissett. And I think, as I'll talk about in the third segment, they will do it. But there are technically a few reasons why I suppose a team could say in this situation, you know what? We'll let you explore the waters and figure it out what you want to do with your career next season. So let's talk about the argument against Oshae Brissett, albeit it will be a very, very brief one. Before we do that, though, I want to tell you guys about the good people over at Shady Rays, an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed double frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane protection program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every pair. They will send you a brand new pair if you lose them no matter what happened. Give them a try. If you don't love them, you'll pay nothing. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays, exclusively for our listeners. Head to shadyrays.com. Use the code Locked On when you check out. You'll get 50, Use that code Locked On to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code Locked On for Shady Rays' best deal this season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. Shady Rays, go check them out today. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Now here, the latest and greatest from all of our local experts at the Locked On Network around the NBA playoffs as we are rolling through. Teams could get eliminated tonight. Huge round for both the 1 and 2 seeds out west. You'll want to hear all about it on Locked On Now. Let's talk about the against, air quotes, for those on YouTube who can see me, the against re-signing Oshae Brissett argument for the Pacers. So the Pacers team structure this offseason, from a team building perspective, from a salary cap perspective, is really, really interesting. They have a lot of reasons they could decide to stay over the cap. They have a lot of reasons they could decide to go under the salary cap. They've got 3 young draft picks coming in and could swap some stuff around always in trades. And you have 3 young picks coming into a team that has spoken that they would like to be good next year, and their franchise ethos says they want to be good. They have a really, really good young player in Tyrese Haliburton that didn't lead to a lot of wins last year. You put all these moving parts together and these ideas that are not concrete yet for a team, and you have an offseason that could go a number of different ways. And I only say that to say, a lot of guys, their role or their decisions on them seem really obvious and secure, but I wouldn't go that far about every single thing for the Pacers. So let's talk about some moving parts or just some numbers that will make free agency really interesting for all the Pacers free agents, really. But just in general, if you're a lesser Pacers free agent, that you're probably sweating. So the Pacers, like I just said, have 4 free agents this offseason. Ricky Rubio, TJ Warren, Lance Stevenson, Jalen Smith, and then maybe Oshae Brissett, although again, I'll talk in the third segment why I think he'll be back. If you assume the first 4 guys whose contracts actually expire, that's 11 guys the Pacers still have under contract for next season. 11 out of a roster of 15. And then you add in that they have the 5th pick in the draft. That's a guy that will almost certainly be, whatever the pick ends up being, 5th, 6th, 7th, 3rd, 4th, whatever. They have a top pick in the draft. That guy's going to be on the roster. Whatever pick slot they end up in, if they trade, whatever, that guy's going to be on the team. That's 12. They also have pick 31. And that's 1 pick after the first round. That's basically a first rounder that you get to negotiate salary with. That's 2. That's 13 slots on the roster. And Brissett could be one of those guys. But if you have 13 out of 15 slots, you can't drastically change your team in free agency. Maybe the Pacers make some lopsided trades to free up some of these roster spots. Who knows? But if they want to bring back TJ Warren and they find a way to bring back Jalen Smith, then all of a sudden that's their team. Their team is the same team as last year, but they have added 2 draft picks. And maybe that's what they want to do. Maybe they think they can grow this team internally enough. Again, if you go by the close games or some of the defensive numbers, this team was better than their record. I think everybody who watched them knows they're better than their record, but that doesn't matter. They only won 6 games after the trade deadline this past season. They only won 25 games total. Your record matters a lot, and the Pacers' record stunk. So a lot of times, I had to remind listeners of this often last season when talking about free agency. The Pacers were 34 and 38 after Nate Bjorkgren. And there was a lot of talk about the importance of keeping Doug McDermott, the importance of keeping TJ McConnell, and can they make the moves to keep these guys instead of the luxury tax? And it's like, well, yeah, they're good. The Pacers bench was good, but you're talking about players coming off of a team that just won less than half their games. And this season, that's even more drastic. So because there aren't a lot of roster spots, and because the Pacers just had a bad season, seismic change in general could be something welcome for this franchise. And that is not really a good reason to not bring Oshae Brissett back. It's just that you have a lot of changes to make. But I don't think, in theory, when you have not a roster spot crunch, but when you don't have a lot of roster spots, when it's easy to create one, but just by saying, you know what, we'll decline Brissett's option, that makes it not a lock necessarily he'll be on the team next year. That's a really stupid reason to not keep a guy. But just because there are a lot of factors at play for a team that just won 25 games, nothing is guaranteed to me. Absolutely. Outside of Tyrese Haliburton being back on the team next year, and probably, honestly, outside of Chris Duarte and Tyrese Haliburton being on the team next year, and probably Isaiah Jackson too, nothing is 100% to me. But Brissett's close. But that could be an argument against, is that you want to free up a roster spot so you can do more stuff. And now, what would you do with a roster spot that's better than having a rotation level forward / wing on a cheapo contract? Not a lot. It's really hard to do better with a roster spot than that. But again, you can't get too wrapped up on keeping guys from a 25-win team, right? The Pacers were not good last year. So that's a really crappy argument, but that is in theory an idea of why for all these free agents. I'll probably talk about this point with every free agent, with Lance, with Jalen Smith, with Warren and Rubio. It's a little different because they didn't play, but a similar concept of how much do you really want to run back after you win 25 games? The other thing Brissett the Pacers will have to consider, and this again is a stretch at best for a reason against bringing him back. But again, I just talked about how if you include that top 9 pick, whatever they end up picking, if you include that, they have 12 guys on the roster. And of those guys, Miles Turner is one of them, and Goga Bitadze is 2 of them, and Isaiah Jackson is 3 of them, and Terry Taylor is 4 of them. You kind of have a crowded-ish front court. And that, I would personally rank Brissett over Terry Taylor. They're about the same age, and Oshae Brissett's better. And depending on what you want to do with Goga and Isaiah Jackson, Turner's the best of those guys. But minutes could be not easy to come by at the 4 spot for the Pacers next year. If they want to play Jackson and Goga, right, one of them is going to be playing the 4. Unless they start Oshae Brissett, which isn't crazy to me. But there will be minutes that are hard to get, especially if they bring back TJ Warren. Then it will be even harder to find minutes for 4s on this Pacers roster. So that's not to say they shouldn't bring back Oshae Brissett. They want to have minutes for him. They will. Of those guys I just named, he's better than all of them right now, except for Miles Turner. Isaiah Jackson could catch him soonish, but maybe not this next season. Right? You'd like to have Oshae Brissett on the team. He's better than a lot of those guys. Maybe he starts at the 4 again. He started at the 4 for them down the stretch of the season, and things went mostly fine. But in theory, you have a crunch there, and it's not hard to decide to excise a guy like Oshae Brissett, who the Pacers had a better net rating with Brissett off the floor than on the floor. I get why that argument could be made. And I think in the ideal world, Brissett's a backup 4, 3, 5, whatever. He played that backup 5 role on his 10-day contract with the Pacers 2 years ago, was excellent at the 4, started at the 3 a few games, if you'll recall, down the stretch of this season when the Pacers were low on bodies. Like, he's played a lot of these positions, and he always does a good job in them. The impact stats don't necessarily, or the net rating stats and some of the impact stats don't necessarily bear that out. But he is clearly talented and can do things that help the team, right? So the arguments against keeping Oshae Brissett are both very weak. They are that the Pacers will have a very tight amount of roster spots and a tight roster crunch to bring guys back. And not a lot, they have a lot of flexibility in theory, but when you don't have a lot of roster spots, it's hard to be creative in that way, unless they make huge seismic trades, which is very possible. And if they do bring him back without making some of these seismic trades, they will likely have a very crowded front court group featuring a lot of guys returning from a 25-win team. Maybe that's fine to them, right? When Turner played and Brissett was the backup, they, were at least play-in quality 2 years ago. They were a much better team when those 2 guys were in the rotation, at least this season, prior to everything changing with injuries and trades. But there are, I guess you could squint and say these are the reasons against keeping Oshae Brissett. They are very flimsy reasons, but I don't think they are completely nothing. And those reasons deduce the odds to me that Brissett would be back on the Pacers next season from like 99 to about 97. It's not a big change, but it's certainly factors they have to consider. And then, when you think of him, just putting raw odds on him being back on the team, like, he's probably a positive asset in a trade. In fact, he almost certainly is. Like, you think of Torrey Craig, for example, and Torrey Craig has more impact to a contending team than to a team like the Pacers. But like, Torrey Craig got the Pacers a second rounder in Jalen Smith in a trade, and Brissett was better than Torrey Craig last year. They benched Torrey Craig to get Brissett minutes last season, and Oshae Brissett's younger, right? He's got positive value. They should want to bring him back. I think they will bring him back, but there are, in theory, given their team construction and moving parts, reasons why his positive value means it's not like 100% that he would be back with the Pacers next year, but it's still pretty damn high. Those are extremely flimsy reasons. I just wanted to talk about them and put those considerations in everybody's head, because when you talk about Lance Stevenson, when you talk about TJ Warren, when you talk about Jalen Smith, the fact that there are a lot of guys in the front court, especially with Smith, and the fact that there aren't a lot of roster spots to come by at all, mean that if you want the Pacers to be a splashy team this free agency period, then you're really not banking on a lot of their free agents coming back, because they have a tight roster and a lot of guys under contract who could, in theory, come back. So that's the weak arguments against bringing back Brissett, but I still think the arguments for bringing him back, the fact that he is good and young and plays very well with the Pacers' best player, are way stronger. So what do I think will happen? Well, I've kind of tipped it, but I'll explain it in more detail. What do I think is going to happen to Oshae Brissett in this free agency period. Let's talk about that. But first, let me tell you about the good people over at Built Bar who are making the best tasting protein bars ever. So many Locked On Pacers listeners have tried them and told me they love them. I hope you'll be the next. What are they? They're protein bars that are 100% covered in real chocolate. They basically taste like a treat instead of just a protein bar. Like the ones you get in the store don't taste very good, or they have weird structure and material. They're just not that good. Built Bars are delicious, 100% covered in that chocolate, real chocolate. They basically taste like a candy bar, and they're healthy, low calorie, high protein. So you can replace a candy bar with them, but it's way healthier and they're better. You can see all the macros right on their website. You'll be blown away for those high protein, low calorie numbers. But on there, you'll see most of them have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, 17 grams of protein. They're all awesome. So many good flavors. I love the peanut butter brownie. A lot of people love the cookie dough. The mint brownie is really good. They have like an actual brownie variety. It's hard to explain, but they're really good. You got to try them. Go to built.com. Use the promo code LOCKED15 when you check out. You'll get 15% off your order. That promo code again is LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. Thank you again for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, I recommend Locked On NBA. Hear about what's going on around the association last night, including all the playoff games, and yours truly. We're there breaking down with John Krause of Locked On Celtics. Heat, Hawks, Timberwolves, Grizzlies, Pelicans, Suns. Lots of great action around the NBA last night. If you want to hear more from me, go check out Locked On NBA. So let's finish up here with Oshae Brissett's free agency. What do I think is going to happen? So to me, I think that the best route for the Pacers to take is the restricted free agency route where they decline his team option and then negotiate a new contract with Brissett in free agency. He said it himself. If you want to go back to last Thursday's podcast and listen, he loves Indiana. He's very grateful for what they did for him, drafting him in the G League draft in 2021, taking him through the Mad Ant system, growing him up into the 10-day guy. And he was good with the Raptors too, but he feels like the Pacers kind of resurrected his career to an extent when they did that. Not that he owes them anything, but he does feel like this is a good home for him. He's on the right age to grow with this team. He's seen them be successful. He's seen them go through a rebuild. He's a big part of this. This could be, in his career, going from Nick Nurse to Nate Bjorkgren to Rick Carlisle, the first offseason where he stays with the same coach and system for 2 seasons. And that's a big opportunity for growth for him. And so to me, the best route would be negotiate a new deal with him for not necessarily a super long-term contract, although on his cheapo number, I'd be willing to do a longer deal, but he won't want that. But a shorter deal that's still longer than the 1 year he has left. I think that a 2 or 3 year deal makes sense. Line him up with whoever you feel like he should be lined up with. It's really lame to say, but for example, a 2-year deal gets him out the Buddy Hield summer. A 3-year deal lines him up with TJ McConnell summer. A 2-year deal puts him in the Halliburton summer. A 3-year deal puts him in the Duarte summer. Like, there's a lot of guys you could say, like, yeah, we think you make sense to be a part of the core with this part of the team or this part of the team. To me, the Pacers should push for a 3-year deal so that he's cheap all the way through the rest of Halliburton's rookie scale deal, because Halliburton's going to be a max player at the end of that. And they would want the team to be, in theory, as cheap as possible the year after Tyrese Halliburton becomes a very expensive player. So a 4-year deal pushes him through Duarte's free agency, which would be great for the Pacers, but extremely unlikely to me that Brissett would take a 4-year deal at this stage of his career. Maybe he would. He'll be 27 at the end of that. But a 3-year deal makes the most sense to me, especially if the Pacers would be willing to throw an option on the end of that. Just so you line him up with those future dates that are key of, okay, maybe in a couple years from now, Buddy Hield's off the books, we can pay you then, but Halliburton's expensive, so we don't have a lot of room, but they'll have his bird rights. A lot of factors at play, but just to me, locking him up, especially through Halliburton's free agency, would be ideal for the Pacers, but I understand from Brissett's perspective saying, I would like to get back on the market when I'm 25, 26, about to enter my prime, and would like to get more money then. So I think the years part will be a little tougher than the dollars part of the negotiation for this, but that's how I would start negotiating. If I'm the Pacers with Oshae Brissett, I would say, hey, we would like you on a 3-year deal. We'll decline your team option to do that. And again, he's under contract. That's not tampering. So they can start those discussions. That's a gray area. I guess I shouldn't say it that rosily, but I think that is something they should consider. And Brissett, I get why he would want a little bit shorter deal. Again, if he pops next season with a younger team, all of a sudden he could be worth a lot more. Again, he's only 24, has clearly had a nice linear growth trajectory in the NBA. Like, that might be receptive to him. But what I think will happen is something like I think what will happen is the Pacers will decline the team option and then bring him back on like 2 for 12, 3 for 15, the dollars per year amount, drops as years are added generally in a situation like this with a player about his talent level. And those numbers are kind of what I thought of off the top of my head when I just was making up what would make sense for him. When I go back to last year, and the cap goes up a little bit, so these aren't perfect comparisons. They never are perfect comparisons. Team situation always goes into this. But this is something that is talked about by agents as they kind of decide how to negotiate. They compare it to past contracts that they think fit the situation of their player. So last summer, Ken Birch goes back to Toronto, or goes to Toronto, 3 years, $20 million. And I think that was a little much for Ken Birch, obviously, who's like the fifth big in Toronto now, although he's starting for them in the playoffs and playing like 4 minutes game, whatever. Brissett's about that valuable, maybe a little more so, but there's a lot of guys better than Ken Birch who got lower deals than that. Michael Green went to Denver, 2 years, $16 million. Rudy Gay went to Utah, 3 years, $18.5 million. David Nwaba went to Houston, 3 years, $15 million. Jared Vanderbilt went to Minnesota on a steal of a deal, 3 years, $13 million. And here's a good one. Torrey Craig went to the Pacers, 2 years, $10 million, $5 million a year. So those numbers are all to say the most expensive one there was JaMychal Green at $8 million a year. And JaMychal Green's probably a little bit better than Oshae Brissett. Maybe not. That's a close one. Ken Birch at about $7 million a year. Rudy Gay at about $6 million. Nwaba at $5 million. Vanderbilt and Craig, in the high $4s per year. So here's the thing. Torrey Craig's on there for me, and I included him for reference for Pacers fans because Brissett outplayed him last year. He surpassed Torrey Craig in the Pacers rotation during the season. Not like by a lot. Like Torrey Craig still played in almost every game and provided them a lot of value, but there was a reason that Oshae Brissett was playing more than him, in kind of that December stretch, right? December 6th, Torrey Craig gets his first DNP of the season. In the 4 games before that, he played in less than 7 minutes. Then he plays less than 5 minutes the next 2 games, then 2 DNPs. And then he starts playing again during their little COVID outbreak and then goes back to being inactive, right? So he got outplayed and lost his rotation spot to Brissett. So Brissett's probably going to come to the table and say, hey, I deserve more than that. And that's where I got 2 for 12 from. 3 for 15 was about the David Nwaba comparison, although Nwaba didn't play particularly well for the Rockets. And Rudy Gay got 3 for 18.5. That value seems about right for Brissett. In theory, Gay now not even playing for the Jazz. That deal looked like a disaster for Utah. So all those numbers to say, I think if I'm the Pacers and I'm shooting for a 3-year deal for Oshae Brissett, about $17 million would be the number that I'd be really happy with, or I feel like makes sense as a negotiation spot. Brissett's probably going to come to the table wanting that Ken Birch deal, maybe a little more than that. Justin Holiday, for example, if you remember, got like 3 for 18. 3 for 18.7. That makes sense to me. Brissett was about that good last year, and he's younger. So to me, that is about what I would hope to have happen if I'm the Pacers. What I think will happen is some tug and pull negotiation between 2 years and 3 years, and more money per year or less money per year, depending on the years. But this could go a number of different ways. Maybe Oshae Brissett actually doesn't want to be with the Pacers and just made really good PR statements. And then he'll probably sign the qualifying offer or just be back on a 1-year minimum deal, which again is fine for the Pacers. It's a cheap contract for a good player. But maybe that's how this ends up. But what I think will happen, and what makes the most sense to happen, is they determine and find a new deal that's either 2 or 3 years in length, and it's somewhere between, let's say, $5 and $7 million per season. I think that's good value for Brissett for him to get that money after coming off of, first of all, he was on a 2A with Toronto, then 2 10-days, and then cheapo contract, non-guaranteed contract, team option contract, right? Like this will be guaranteed money for him. He doesn't have to think about getting waived midseason and losing any money anymore for the first time of his career. It won't be that long of a contract, and it helps the Pacers know that they have a guy around their core age under contract through Halliburton's time or to Halliburton's time that will help them grow as a team, both if they want to be good or if they want to take like a gap year or a rebuilding year. I think that's a win for every party, is something like that. So my official guess, if I have to do like a write something down guess, would be 3 for 17 for Oshae Brissett to return to the Pacers, 3 years, $17 million. But what could happen, maybe 2 for 12, maybe 2 for 13. Maybe he's back on a 1-year deal. But there's a lot of options, and I think that makes the most sense for all the parties involved. We'll have to see, though. This won't come into fruition for about 2 months is when these deadlines are due. But again, we have lots of time this offseason to cover all this stuff, and I love doing these type of podcasts that walk through all the options and considerations before landing on what I think will happen. So next week we'll do another one of these players. I guess if I get requests for a specific one more than others, I'll do that, but I'll probably just pick one at random. At that point, tomorrow's show, we're back on the prospect tours with Chet Holmgren, a guy that I am very high on and a lot of others are not as high on. I'm very excited to talk about him and share information about Chet Holmgren with you guys. Friday, we'll do another player season recap group. A lot of fun content coming on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Thank you guys a ton for listening. Hope you had a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.